Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome back. It's good to see everybody. Let's go ahead and start out with any praises this morning. Any opportunities this week for God to use you? Any opportunities for you to share maybe what you learned here on Sunday morning throughout the week?
I mentioned a lot that we go to church. Family goes to church and, blah, blah, blah. And we'll make the customers will come in and they'll see my business card and they'll, church, last name. And then we'll get talking about
there you go.
My father-in-law's Catholic church. And my coworker asked me this week what denomination I was. I said, my church is Reformed Baptist. And we got kind of into a conversation how I grew up non-denominational, kind of in, the Pentecostal world, and how when I met Trenton, my heart was led to kind of transition, and how she was Lutheran. She is Lutheran. I shouldn't say was. She still is, and her husband is a organist at their church.
Oh,
and we got into a really nice conversation about like the difference in the denomination and my conversion. I guess you could say she was surprised how different it was and how passionate I was about the difference about the two denominations. It was just kind of nice to have someone actually ask me,
yes.
Just because I'm very open about it, and I definitely open the door for people to, talk
yeah,
to me
your
about
last,
it. But like,
your last name, sure.
Lots of people aren't interested, so it was kind of nice to hear her about it. And she's definitely one of those older women who, has just always gone to the same church because that's what, and you can kind of tell like she hasn't questioned why she goes to that church or why she considers herself Lutheran for a long time, just because that's.
What their family went to.
Yeah. So it was a nice conversation in the middle of my workday.
Nice.
Have someone.
Feels good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you're looking for sort of a non-conflicting conversation, when somebody mentions that they go to church or what they heard at church or whatever, that is really a good transition point for any of us who have a difficult time maybe evangelizing. But that conversation is therapeutic, it's cathartic. It's really part of that transition to talk about Christ. So, yeah, I mean, you have that conversation one time, then you see them again, and then you can go a little bit deeper, or you can go deeper in that conversation. But it's a nice transition. Good. Anyone else? Okay, all right, let's go ahead and pray and get into our lessons this morning. We've got a lot to cover. Father, thank you for this day. Father, for empowering us as you do each and every day. Father, what a wonderful thought it is for us to have you as our Father, not just as creator of the universe, but one who is intimately involved in not just the affairs of man, not just the events in the life of men, but also in our concerns and those things that we bring before your throne with tears in our eyes, the cares that you tell us to cast upon you, all of the doubts, points of anxiety in our life that we try and struggle to resolve on our own. You delight in taking off of us as our Heavenly Father. You are the one with all of the resources, all of the strength, and all of the power. And Father, I pray that we would find our strength in you, not just in our flesh, that we would find our wisdom in you. Lord, I thank you for what you've done in my life this week at the center and with my bosses, and it's just it's an amazing intervention that you did, and thank you for that and for the lives of these folks, even though it's not maybe been voiced this morning. I thank you for working in their life as you have, and the health that you give us every day, and we don't even think twice about it. The ability to use our muscles and to go to work every day and healing process that takes place at night in our bodies. And Father, the keeping spiritually of us in your kingdom, something that we ought to always be thankful for. We thank you for Sarah Beth's conversation that she had with one of her customers, Father, regarding her name. You gave her a name through marriage that promotes a conversation. And I pray that we would all take advantage of that opportunity to share your good name, your great name, with this world that needs you so desperately. We thank you for this time. I pray that you would bless it, allow for us to engage in our minds and hearts, so that we would leave here different. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, we have moved on to, I guess you would say, chapter 9 or confession 9, and that is on free will. On free will. What I thought we would do this morning, instead of just going point by point by point by point, I thought we would read all of those, since there's only 5 points here. But I want you to listen very carefully as we go through the different points of free will, or the man's will, that will that God has gifted all humans. And then you'll see the different points as we go through, and then we're going to address each one of them separately. So let's go ahead and read 9.1 all the way to 9.5. It says, God has endowed human will with natural liberty and power to act on choices, so that it is neither forced nor inherently bound by nature to do good or evil. Humanity, in the state of innocence, had freedom and power to will and to do what was good and well-pleasing to God. Yet this condition was unstable, so that humanity could fall from it. 9.3. Humanity, by falling into a state of sin, has completely lost all ability to choose any spiritual good that accompanies salvation. Thus, people in their natural state are absolutely opposed to spiritual good and dead in sin, so that they cannot convert themselves by their own strength or prepare themselves for conversion. When God converts sinners and transforms them into the state of grace, he frees them from their natural bondage to sin, and by his grace alone enables them to will and to do freely what is spiritually good. Yet because of their remaining corruption, they do not perfectly nor exclusively will what is good, but also will what is evil. Only in the state of glory is the will made perfectly and unchangeably free toward good alone. So you sort of see a progression from the general, as God created, to how the condition was for Adam and Eve, to the point of us today, and then where we will be ultimately in glory. So this confession is stating that we as humans have a will that is free to do good or evil, to make choices according to our desires, according to our motives. But interestingly enough, I just got done teaching on God's decree. So if you listened to number 9 here, confession number 9, where it tells us that we have the right to make choices on our own, to decide good and evil in our choice. But then you go back to 3, confession number 3, God's decree. I want to read you that first part of God's decree. It says, from all eternity, God decreed everything that occurs, without reference to anything outside himself. He did this by the perfectly wise and holy counsel of his own will, freely and unchangeably. Now go to the last sentence in that. In this decree, God's wisdom is displayed in directing all things. And his power and faithfulness are demonstrated in accomplishing his decree. So, how exactly do we reconcile these two confessions without coming to the conclusion that in his sovereignty, God micromanages us, making all humans mere puppets or robots, as we are often referred to as Calvinists? How do we bring those two together? God ordains all things, but yet then he gives us a free will. Mm-hmm. So we still choose evil. Good point. John? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I was talking about that. Hmm. Good. Any mechanical capability. Launch. Harvard? Hi? Yes. Anyone else want to give a shot? Certainly not an easy question to answer by any means. But to be fair to the writers of the confession, if you look back in confession number 3, they do allow for, like Marvin just said, the working of man's free will there in the middle of 3.1. It says, this decree does not violate the will of the creature or take away the free working or contingency of second causes. So there is an elaborate wisdom, a wise counsel that God employs, who he is, in the giving of this decree, taking all of that into it account. So the short answer is this. Man's will is not free from God's sovereignty, but it's a will that is within his sovereign decree. So it's not free from his sovereignty, it's a will within his sovereign decree. It's already all been accounted for. So it's, get this, it's free will, not autonomous will. Would you agree with that? It's free will, but not autonomous will. Now, St. Augustine, or Augustine, taught that there were 4 conditions of the will. And this becomes very relevant as we go through this confession. And he uses the term in Greek, not Greek, but Latin, posse non peccare. It means the possibility not to sin, the possibility not to sin. And then posse peccare, which is the possibility to sin. And so when we talk about the possibility not to sin and the possibility to sin, we really talk about 2 individuals in history, other than, of course, God through Jesus himself, but who is, and he would not have the possibility to sin, and that's debatable among the theologians, but who are the 2 folks who would have both of those, the possibility not to sin and the possibility to sin? Adam and Eve. Okay, so that is called the state of innocence, where they could go either way. They were, Adam was created good in righteousness, in true holiness, that he might know God, his creator, love him, and live with him in eternal blessedness. That's what we get from the Heidelberg Catechism. But Adam was created good, and he had that opportunity to sin or not to sin. But then we have non posse, non peccare. It's the impossibility not to sin. The impossibility not to sin. And who would qualify for this condition? The impossibility not to sin. Yeah, everyone after Adam. The impossibility not to sin. It's a double negative. Sorry. So it's everyone after Adam. It's impossible for us not to sin because we are all born into sin. And then there is the non posse peccare, which is the impossibility to sin. The impossibility to sin. And when we talk about that, we're talking about what stage? Is that for us now? It's when we're glorified. When we're glorified, it's impossible for us to sin at that point. I'm looking forward to that. It's called the state of glory or glorification. One of the foremost authorities on the will is Jonathan Edwards. And Jonathan Edwards wrote a book, if you've ever tried to read it. And I say try to because it's a very difficult book to read. And I've tried several times, and I think I've gotten through it, but I would have to read it several more times to fully get it. It's called The Freedom of the Will. And he explains the will this way. He says the human mind chooses something rather than the contrary, or rather than the want or lack of or non-existence of that thing. So in every act of refusal, the mind chooses the absence of the thing refused. The choice the mind's making. The positive and the negative are set before the mind for its choice. So we're talking about human accountability here, right? We're talking about making a decision or choice between good and evil, positive and negative. This is the act of the will, Jonathan Edwards says. So get this. He says, in essence, we exercise our will every time we choose, refuse, approve, disapprove, like, dislike, embrace, reject, determine, direct, command, forbid, incline, be adverse to, be pleased by, or displeased by. So it's not just I choose, it's all of those others that we, in doing all of those others, we are making a choice. We are exercising our will. As human beings are designed to have a freedom of choice, oftentimes we make decisions, and you know those decisions you make. You have a big decision to make. So what do you do often when you have a lot of different elements to a decision? You get out a piece of paper, right? And what do you write on there? Pros and cons, right? You say pros, for, cons, against. For and against. And you list those things. More money, closer to work, blah, 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 blah. And you make the decision based on what best benefits you, maybe, and your family, based on your value system. Yeah. Yeah, Jonathan Edwards actually calls that the higher motive. And so he talks about motives pretty extensively. And when he talks about the higher motive, it's just that case. You know, you may desire something, but then because there's money involved or you have to feed your family or whatever, you go with your higher motive, which I said here, according to our value system. So depending on your value system, that's where your decisions will be made. So that's why when we say, you know, you look at where you spend your money, you look at where you spend your time, you look at different things in your life, actions you've taken, choices you've made, you really are able to see somebody's value system, what they hold near and dear or what they hold valuable. And so I wanted to challenge you with the thought that although, Dawn, did you have something? Oh. Although you do make choices for things, Jonathan Edwards makes the point that you're also making choices not to on the other case. When you choose one direction, you're purposely saying, but not that direction. Because I see this as a greater value. Now, it may be against my inclination, but my higher motive would say, I want to feed my family, so I'm going to get up early and I'm going to go to work. I'd love to sleep in, but, right? So oftentimes throughout the day, our lives are filled with making these kinds of decisions. And we are created to do that. We're designed to do that. This is what separates us from the animal kingdom. God created us in his own image. This goes for when we are tempted by sin. When we as believers are tempted by sin. We weigh out the consequences. Will anybody see me? If I do this sin, will I be found out? And then we decide whether or not the risk outweighs the reward. To feed our flesh or to improve our financial status or whatever it may be. So I can do this, and this does happen in your mind when you are choosing to sin. It is a choice. You're tempted, and when you get to that precipice, you say, let's weigh out the two. One has consequences, but let's minimize the risk of those consequences by doing it in secret, or doing it when no one's looking, or doing it whatever, covering it up somehow. Or do I obey? Well, I really believe that my flesh deserves this right now, and I don't necessarily want to be disciplined at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and sin because that's where my higher value is. And so we have to start thinking in terms of where our higher value is. And when we sin, what does that say about our value of God? It minimizes, it lowers our value of God, our view of God. It raises what? Our view of self, our view of comfort. Let me throw this out there as well. When an unsaved person is asked for money by a homeless person, they have to make a decision. So they have the freedom of choice in the sense of doing what is quote unquote good or doing what is evil. So we call those good deeds. Those good deeds obviously are not necessarily pleasing to God, but they are indeed good deeds. I did want to mention this, that 9.1 talks about the general state of man when he was created good and evil, that he's able to choose between good and evil. But I wanted to differentiate between how that good is seen in the eyes of God. Later in 9.2, he says, good and well-pleasing to God. So there's a difference there. There's a good and an evil, but then there's a good and well-pleasing to God. And then in 9.3, it says there's a spiritual good. So you and I would agree that anybody who is unsaved who makes a good decision to value their family, to do what's right in the eyes of their family, may not necessarily be pleasing to God because it's not done through faith, but yet it's still good in the sense of the general good. And these decisions go on minute by minute, every day, by the saved and the unsaved. We're created as beings who have choice, choices that we make freely and act on freely as human beings. So there is the faculty of the will granted by God to every human, which is, again, what sets us apart from the animal kingdom by which we choose. But I want you to look, notice 9.1. It says, God has endowed humans with the human will with natural liberty and the power to act on choices. Natural liberty. That means a freedom to act. We have the freedom to act and the power to act. So both the opportunity and compunction and also the ability to act on choices we create that way. These choices that we make, good or evil, are the product of our will, the human will, our free will. And secondly, I want you to notice that the will, the human will, is neither forced nor inherently bound by nature. And what it means by that is not the spiritual nature. In this confession, it's talking about the physical laws of nature, and it's not speaking of our sin nature, of course. And so we're not bound by nature to do good or evil. We see this, and this is very obvious to us throughout Scripture and in our personal experience, as well as what we see with other people in life today. In fact, Jesus points this out to his disciples as he came down from the Mount of Transfiguration. Go with me to Matthew chapter 17. This is just one instance. Matthew 17. Verse 9, and as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. And the disciples asked him, then why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come? He answered, Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. Jesus is referring here, we're told, not only to himself, but also to John the Baptist. And it says that later, that he was speaking to them about John the Baptist. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did to him what they pleased. So the point he's making here is God has created man to be able to do and make decisions of their own volition based on the condition of their heart. So they did to Elijah whatever they pleased. They exercised their wills against John the Baptist and had him what? Beheaded. They did what they thought was right in their own eyes. No one forced them to do it. They weren't bound to a certain course of action. They acted on their own evil intent, the desires of their heart. They were blind. They did not see the truth. And then we go to James, who reiterates this for us. Go to James chapter 1. These are the verses that the writers of the confession used to defend their point in 9.1. James chapter 1, verses 14 and 15. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. And what is his point here in James? What is his point? Yes. Whose responsibility? Who bears the responsibility for their sin? Is it Satan? Is it God? Is it each person? Each person. And so each person makes decisions for themselves here. And the point is that God doesn't tempt or cause anybody to sin, but it is a person himself who tempts, is lured and enticed by his own desire. And so don't look outside of yourself when you're tempted. Just make the right decision of obedience to God, because there is a choice for you, either a choice of good or a choice of evil. And when you sin, that is a choice of evil. Do we have to sin as believers? No. Are we perfect? Are we sinless? No. And so there's a struggle, there's a battle that we find in Romans 7. Paul talks about that, wanting to do what we don't want to do and not doing what we want to do. And so there's always a constant battle here this side of glory that we're in. And we have to sometimes convince ourselves that we are of a different kingdom. We have a different general, that we listen to his commands instead of the general that we used to listen to, and that is Satan himself. So 9.1 says, God endows all humans with a will that is free to act on choices, good or bad. Now, I pointed out to you that there was a difference between 9.1 and some of the other uses of good in this confession. And so let's go to, with the time that we have remaining, 9.2. And we'll briefly cover that this morning. 9.2 says, humanity in the state of innocence had freedom and power to will and to do what is good and well-pleasing to God. So there's good and well-pleasing, but there's also evil. Yet this condition was unstable so that humanity could fall from it. And did they? Yes, they did. It was unstable. And by the way, this confession from the London Baptist Confession of Faith and the Westminster are almost identical. They're almost identical. There's just a couple of things, but it's not notable. So these are identical in their understanding of humanity or human will or free will. The word unstable here is the word mutable, or what does that mean? Changeable. And the understanding here is that the condition that once existed in the age of innocence, or the time of innocence with Adam and Eve, was temporary. As we look back at it now, did it have to be? Not necessarily. Was it ordained to be? Yes. And so Adam and Eve sinned, which made it change. So they were in a condition of innocence before where there was an opportunity for them not to sin, and there was an opportunity for them not to sin. We are not afforded the same kind of opportunity today. We, of course, are born into sin, and we can't go back to that time. Augustine talked about this as Adam was created both able to sin and able not to sin. And I already read to you the Heidelberg Catechism, number 6, that Adam was created good in righteousness and true holiness, that he might know God, his creator, heartily love him and live with him in eternal blessedness. This was his condition that we can never regain until glory. Any thoughts about the first 2 points of this confession of free will? He's a cruel God. There is a glory of redemption that he would not have if we did not sin, or if he did not allow for sin.
Yeah, and as Romans 9, he would have them be able to.
It's a curiosity even the angels appear to look into, isn't it? Something that they're curious about as well. Any other thoughts on man's free will? A lot more that can be discussed about it, but obviously this isn't the format or platform for it. And it was one tree. But it's not like there wasn't any other fruit out there. Right? Glorification. Mhm. If they understand the point, they're disagreeing with us. Like they can just bring it up as a straw man, but not really understand why they're bringing it up as a straw man. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? All right. Al, would you close us?